I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's begin with the headlines for the hour. The US lifts naval blockade in Iran and Trump says the Strait of Hormuz will be open today. And UK politician Andy Burnham wins a local election, paving the way to challenge current Prime Minister Keir Starmer. US Vice President J.D. Vance has cancelled a planned trip to Switzerland as Washington and Tehran prepare for the next stage of negotiations under the newly signed peace agreement. The deal has triggered a 60-day negotiating period and led to the lifting of the US naval blockade of Iran.
The United States and Iran have entered a new 60-day negotiating period after bringing into force an agreement aimed at ending months of war across the Middle East. As part of the deal, US Central Command has lifted its naval blockade of Iranian ports, while Tehran has reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping, restoring a critical route for global energy supplies. Speaking at the White House, Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed that so far both sides were complying with the agreement.
On the military side, the Iranians for the second night in a row did not shoot at any ships in the Strait of Hormuz so far. They are honoring their end of the commitment. And on the blockade, CENTCOM has allowed north of a dozen ships to go through our naval blockade, and so we're also honoring our end of the early part of the agreement.
However, uncertainty has emerged over the next phase of talks after Vice President J.D. Vance cancelled a planned trip to Switzerland, where US and Iranian officials were due to begin technical negotiations. Washington says discussions will continue once arrangements are finalized. The development follows the collapse of plans for a formal signing ceremony in Geneva. Iran argued the event was unnecessary because both presidents had already approved the agreement remotely. Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has endorsed the accord but warned that future negotiations will be difficult. He also claimed US President Donald Trump pursued the deal out of desperation. Trump responded by expressing confidence that the ceasefire would hold and urged all sides to maintain their commitments. The upcoming talks are expected to focus on Iran's nuclear program, sanctions relief, and broader regional security issues.
The recent agreement between the United States and Iran around the Strait of Hormuz has drawn international attention. While the deal temporarily eases commercial shipping traffic, discussions continue over control and authority in the region. Officials say the move is seen as a transitional step towards a final peace agreement. Turaj Shualiliu has more from Tehran.
Iran's Supreme National Security Council says that under the agreement signed with the US, Tehran will allow commercial ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz free of charge for 60 days. In a statement on Thursday, the Council referred to Article 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding, stating that commercial vessels requesting passage through the Strait of Hormuz must submit their application to Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority. Iran's top security body also announced that any fees that may come from passage through the strait during the 60-day period would be covered by the government of Iran. The presidents of Iran and the United States signed a Memorandum of Understanding on Thursday, a deal that was mediated by Pakistan. It extends the ceasefire for 2 months in a bid to reach a final peace deal. Already, shipping traffic in the Strait of Hormuz was eased with the live vessel tracking dashboards, which showed clusters of tankers passing through the waterway after weeks of a near standstill. Meanwhile, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai stressed that the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is exclusively the responsibility of Iran and that any intervention will only complicate the existing situation. Local media quoted him as saying that Iran will maintain direct consultations with Oman to manage the strategic waterways traffic. All of this comes after the Supreme Leader of Iran signaled his approval of the US-Iran deal. His statement was welcomed by President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Negotiator with the US Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. In separate messages on Thursday, they said the leader's statement will guide Iranian negotiators in upcoming talks to secure a final peace deal. Turashir Alilu from Tehran for A News.
US Vice President J.D. Vance says Israel has the right to defend itself but must respect the peace process with Iran. He also criticised attacks in Beirut that killed civilians and called for closer coordination with Washington before outlining his message to Israeli officials.
Number one, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world's superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. And the second message I would give to some of those cabinet members, Bibi, to his credit, has not gone down this path, but to some of these cabinet members in Israel who are attacking the President of the United States, the other thing that I would say is that over the last 3 months, 2/3 of the defensive weapons that have protected your homeland have been built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed concern over escalating violence in South Lebanon and the UNIFIL area of operations, his spokesperson said on Thursday. A senior UN delegation has travelled to Beirut for talks with Lebanese leaders and to reaffirm support for Security Council Resolution 1701. The UN is also allocating $12 million for healthcare, protection and food security programs in affected communities. UN peacekeepers say they continue to observe heavy cross-border military activity in the area.
UNIFIL peacekeepers report that so far today, 143 trajectories of projectiles were observed. Of these, 119 were attributed to the Israeli Defense Forces, with the remainder to Hezbollah. Yesterday, 364 projectile launches were observed, of which 330 were attributed to the IDF and 34 to Hezbollah. UNIFIL also reported 38 violations of Lebanese airspace yesterday, but none today within its area of operations.
The second day of the European Union summit is underway in Brussels as member states negotiate how to allocate €2 trillion from the bloc's common budget over the next 7 years. The discussions are expected to highlight divisions between countries calling for a reduction in the overall budget and those pushing for a more ambitious EU spending plan. Cyprus, which holds the rotating EU Council presidency, has proposed a 2% cut worth €32.8 billion in an effort to bridge the gap between the opposing sides. Any agreement on the budget will require unanimous support from all 27 member states, as well as the consent of the European Parliament. And joining us now to discuss the summit is our guest, Nuno Martins, political analyst from Brussels, Belgium. Nuno, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Now, this summit covers an unusually broad agenda, which, so let's first ask, which issue is likely to dominate discussions behind closed doors among these EU leaders?
The main issue will be the EU budget, because if you see the other issues, basically, either Europe doesn't have a strong voice or a unified voice dealing with them, either don't have the strengths to deal with them. And the budget is an issue that is creating a lot of divisions. It's an issue that the Cyprus presidency would like to close, but it will probably go beyond to the next presidency of the rotative council, which is Ireland. And in fact, Ireland is being a kind of moderating already the situation here regarding the division within the member states to cut the budget or to increase the budget. So for me, this is quite clear that the budget is the main issue being discussed in this council.
So as you said, whenever budgets are discussed, there are questions about who pays and who benefits. So where are the main divisions emerging among member states?
You can say it's not about who pays and who gets it. It's about the idea of getting the funds from the cohesion funds, more or less, and those who contribute more for those funds who want to be giving less to those funds. The question is also, we have to understand that if Ukraine joins the EU, and according to some news that Mrs. von der Leyen is trying to push hard to have Ukraine in the EU soon, it will also be a kind of a shift game, who is going to receive the funds, who is going to contribute more for those funds. And so this is the point. We have a division of around, let's say, three groups. A group which wants to cut, a group which wants to reinforce the cohesion funds, and a group which wants to get more from those funds. And then you have one single country, which is France, who is playing a game of whatever benefits the country, the member state, is better for them, especially the funds where they can get more benefits, which is cap the common agriculture policy within the EU. So this is more or less the division that we are talking about. The Fruggles, which is the group of countries from the north in Germany who wants to give less, they want a lighter budget. We're talking about around 6 countries. And then you have 16 countries, which are those who want to push more for a cohesion fund. And do not forget that now, having the specific question about Hungary, for instance, which makes the case of that Hungary became more interested and more close to get more funds since the Prime Minister of Hungary has changed in the country.
And do you think budget debates reveal the EU's priorities more clearly than the summit declaration, if you like?
Absolutely not. The budget is only about, in my view, and I have a very negative view about this, at the end of the day, it shows exactly what this is all about, is who gets more funding to deal with their own internal policies. And that's what they want to do about. And this shows that everything that we are discussing about defense, about Ukraine, about geopolitics, in my view, does not count necessarily with these budget discussions. This is a pure internal policy decision discussion in order to fulfill some of the governments of the member states and their wishes and their own economic policies.
Okay, let's move on to Ukraine, remains a central concern. How united does the EU currently appear on long-term support for Kyiv?
No, this is one of the cases. This is why I think it's important to say that the budget is the most important. That I think there is a kind of almost unanimity regarding Ukraine right now. There is no will from any country who wants to criticize Ukraine or to criticize the adhesion of Ukraine to the EU to put it down on the table right now, because exactly because of the budget discussion. So I don't think that Ukraine has a problem to discuss. I think it's a kind of more or less accepted issue, and the question is now how to improve the defense industry in Europe, and how this industry and how this new field will go to support the Ukrainian efforts in the war against Russia.
Okay, so beyond Ukraine, would you say we're seeing a broader shift in European thinking about defense, security, and strategic autonomy?
So the shift has already happened. The shift which was to make it as a concern for the EU to increase, to invest in defense and in each member states in different levels, it's being a reality. There is a real will to move on and to push for a more consensual policy towards defense. And this is more or less agreed by all the member states. Also because some of the member states who are pushing for that have convinced other member states who will be more willing not to do that, for instance, like France, but because France also wants to develop and to invest in its own defense industry, they are very much willing to lead the case and to push for the case. So there is a broader concern. It's not an issue, it's a reality. It's going to develop, and it's going to be a stronger reality within the years.
Okay, and leaders are also expected to analyse the recent US-Iran agreement. How is Brussels likely to view this development?
So the question here is very simple also. As you know, the Europeans were not involved in the war. They were not involved in the peace deals. if there will be a peace deal, it will be signed in Switzerland. Europeans see very welcoming this peace deal because they have been pushing for peace, whatever it means. And the question is exactly that. There is no longer than that. The idea is to cut the prices of energy within the member states and to make it easier. It's to open the Hormuz Strait and to make ships navigating as free as possible as they used to have. And all of this means that this peace deal is very welcoming and it's very supported by all the member states.
Could the agreement reduce regional tensions, or are European leaders likely to remain cautious about its long-term durability? Or does it not matter to them much?
So that's a very interesting question because it matters for them, but the question is what is the leverage that the Europeans have within the regional tensions right away? You have a problem between Israel and Mrs. Callas. Israel had cut ties with Mrs. Callas. You have a problem between some Gulf states and France, for instance. You have a problem. So the question is exactly that. What is the leverage that the European Union has in the region? And to be honest with you, also because the European Union is keeping sanctions against the Iranian regime mullahs. So all of this shows that at the end of the day, the leverage of Europe is very low or almost in existence in my view.
And economic competition with China remains high on the agenda, or is on the agenda. What are the EU's principal concerns about that at this moment?
So that's a very interesting question as well, because it is important to understand that the reality of China, the China industrial policy is strong. The China industrial policy is killing the European industrial policy as well. There is a division within the states. There is Chinese influence in some member states. And the question is, what the Europeans, as a friend of mine who used to be an advisor in the European Commission told me recently, the next years will be important for Europe to understand two main issues if they really want to be a player worldwide, is how they are going to confront the Chinese industrial policy and its challenges to the European one on one hand, and the second hand will be migration and the tensions created within each member state. So, and this is going to be, and I do believe, and this is what is going to happen if we do not tackle this in a serious way. It doesn't matter if we are supporting or but something has to happen, because this policy of being something like hybrid doesn't bring any benefits for anyone within the member states and within the EU as a whole.
So Nuno, is Europe seeking economic de-risking from China, or are we gradually moving toward a more competitive economic relationship?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for you. There is a division, as I said. There is both ideas are on the table, also because there is this kind of reluctancy of seeing the Americans as a partner in the future, at least this current administration. So let's see what is going to happen. But both cases are on the table, and I think both cases will be more or less. In my view, there won't be a definition exactly of what is going to happen. Both cases will coexist, sometimes more for one case, sometimes for the other case, but I think they will coexist at least in the coming future.
And Nuno, many European industries argue they face unfair competition. Is Brussels moving toward a more defensive economic position, would you say?
What do you mean by unfair competition? Internally or externally?
Because internally.
Exactly. So the question is, this is the dilemma of the common market, which means the common market has to be open for all companies, either they are European or not. But at the end of the day, what the EU has been doing is to give more responsibility and more conditions for the European business to be developing while not giving those same conditions to external companies. And this is, in my view, unfair. It has creating some very big problems to the European industrial policies and communities, and it has to change. It is, and the EU has to take a decision if the common market applies only for European companies and whatever external company wants to deal with, or if it will apply for all the external companies. But the question, all the companies either external or not. The question is that this is not clear within the decision-making process in Brussels, and this is not clear exactly what is moving. There is, to be fair with you, the Green Deal created a lot of problems for the common market and for the European companies, and this has to be, in my view, reevaluated and to be compensated in certain ways. Otherwise, Europe will lose a strong voice worldwide, and it will be killing slowly its own industrial companies.
Okay. Now, Nuno, I know your analysis is that the major talking point here is the budget in this summit. Now, coupled with that, Ukraine, Iran, China were also on the agenda. Do these discussions perhaps reflect an EU that's becoming more geopolitical in its outlook?
That's the intention, and there is a division. You have to understand right away there is a tension between some of the institutions about the role of the EU as a geopolitical actor. The problem is the following. For you to be a geopolitical actor, it's not only about wanting to be a geopolitical actor, it's how can you be a geopolitical actor? And at this moment, Europe is very, in my view, is very weak, is very divided, and it needs to have a clear image and message to be, again, a player in the geopolitics. What we see right away is not only the division of geopolitical between the US, China, mainly, but we see, depending on the regions, the rise of specific regional powers which are being very influential in those regions. And the EU has not a voice so far that can be imposed in other countries, also because it's not clear for the EU if the EU wants to be more involved with the United Nations or by itself. This has to be clear, this has to be stronger, and this has to be at least a message that you have to construct to the will the power to make that will strong and a reality.
Okay. Nuno, thank you so much for joining us on the program. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend.
Debate continues within the European Union over a new package of sanctions against Russia. However, differences remain among member states on several key issues. Against this backdrop, Bulgaria has openly voiced its concerns ahead of the latest discussions.
Bulgaria has already expressed certain reservations about these sanctions because we have already stated our position that we will not allow sanctions that harm and pose a risk to the Bulgarian economy. Here I can point out the risk to the functioning of Lukoil. I can point out risks for supplying the capital's metro with spare parts. We will assess what the risk is. That is why there will still be talks, very serious ones. And if we see a public risk for the operation of Lukoil Neftochim Burgas, we will want it to be excluded from the sanctions package.
US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has warned that some European allies may be falling short of their NATO commitments. NATO defence ministers are gathering in Brussels just days before a major NATO leaders summit. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte says that this gathering of defence ministers and the gathering of NATO leaders in Turkey in a couple of weeks' time is all about the issue of delivering on defence spending, delivering on improving defence capabilities, manufacturing more weaponry, more military hardware, and delivering for Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, here at this NATO gathering of defence ministers, calls for more support on the battlefield as well as air defences. Now, on the issue of defence spending, Mark Rutte full of praise for Canada and European allies, saying that defence spending in the past year has increased to the tune of nearly 20%. However, Pete Hegseth, while welcoming some of those developments, say it is still falling well shy of what the United States needs to see. That is why, as part of his wider objective to achieve what he describes as NATO 3.0, he wants to see Europe taking the lead when it comes to European security. He says even more defence spending is needed by European allies to achieve that. He's launched a 6-month review where he'll be seeing where Europe is at when it comes to that pledge. Now, he says some European allies will pass this test with flying colours. He warns others will fail. He said he is going to be having candid conversations both in public and in private with those members to try and force them to honour their commitments to boost defence spending from previous goals of 2% annual GDP on defence to 5% come the year 2035. The US has warned there will be real consequences, potentially the US cutting its NATO contributions if European partners aren't upholding their end of the bargain. So Pete Hegseth says that they are committed to this military alliance, but he warns that it must be a two-way street. William Denslow, Frey News, reporting from NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Diplomatic efforts to end the war are once again in focus. While Kyiv says it is open to talks, it's also calling on Europe to take stronger and more decisive action. Against this backdrop, Ukraine's leadership is urging Western allies to increase pressure on Russia.
Putin wants to get everything we have burned. He is a madman and the partners get it. Ukraine is ready for negotiations with him despite that. But Europe has to shift into gear for us to have a strong position, to commit fully on sanctions without loopholes, on confiscation without exceptions, and on funding Ukraine.
2 people were killed and 2 injured in Russian strikes on Ukraine's Sumy region, with 9 more wounded in Kharkiv, including children. Separately, a drone attack hit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant's workshop overnight, causing damage, but no casualties were reported. The strikes come after Ukrainian drone attacks on Moscow, including a major oil refinery that was hit, that injured at least 16 people and disrupted flights. President Volodymyr Zelensky called the strikes a response to Russia's attack on a Kyiv monastery and said if Ukraine is going to burn, then Moscow will burn too. Moscow has threatened large-scale strikes on Ukraine on a regular basis. NATO members Germany and the UK have announced new military aid packages for Ukraine. German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius said Berlin will allocate $200 million for the procurement of guided missiles. Britain has also pledged to supply Ukraine with 150,000 domestically produced drones and new air defence systems. According to officials, the British assistance package will be financed through proceeds generated from frozen Russian assets.
Ukraine makes no sense. His persistent refusal to accept
with you, and it's an honour to be here today.
We'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay tuned.
Looking back on the past is important to learn from experience. It is like a chronicle, page by page. War, Auschwitz, love, humor.
What was the atmosphere like in your home? Perhaps even a particular smell that you associated with?
The smell of the theater. Soviet Union had many shortcomings, and the world we live in today gives us little reason for optimism.
We are Ukraine souls the Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
The Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back. You're watching A News. And now to news from Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where authorities report the continued spread of the Ebola virus. Health experts warn the outbreak could become the worst on record if shortcomings in the state's response are not addressed soon. Chris Okamringa has more in this report from Kinshasa.
Health authorities in the Democratic Republic of Congo say the Ebola virus has continued spreading in the eastern and northeastern parts of the country. Most cases of the contagious disease are in Ituri province, which has been plagued by insecurity for years. Health workers have struggled to trace patients due to ongoing insecurity and the area's remoteness. That, coupled with a mistrust from some community members who do not believe the disease exists, has hampered response efforts. The head of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently warned that the Ebola outbreak could be the worst ever if these issues are not addressed quickly. The government has acknowledged the need to step up containment efforts. Authorities are also calling for more funding for medical equipment to test samples, strengthen surveillance, and set up Ebola treatment centers. They recently launched an appeal for $518 million to stop the disease from spreading across the African continent, but has so far received $100 million. The Ebola outbreak circulating in the DRC is caused by the Bundibujo strain, for which there is currently no approved vaccine or specific medicine. Medics are relying on rehydration and supportive care to treat patients who were brought in early for treatment. At least 67 patients have recovered and been discharged from hospitals since the outbreak was declared on May 15. Chris Ochamringa for A News in Kinshasa.
International gold and silver prices edged lower on Thursday. On the New York Mercantile Exchange, August gold futures slipped 0.08% to settle at $4,232 per ounce. July silver futures fell more sharply, down 3.09% to close at $66.39 per ounce. Both are considered safe havens for investors, which is why their prices remain high amid global politician tensions. In the 51st annual meetings of the Islamic Development Bank Group in Baku, Azerbaijan has handed over the chair to Burkina Faso. The four-day event brought together officials from 57 member countries, along with development and finance experts. More than 32 agreements were signed in Baku worth over $4.7 billion. The meetings were held under the theme Regional Integration for Sustainable Prosperity. They focused on stronger cooperation and development among member states. The next meetings will be held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia in 2027.
These things happen. We're live on camera.
Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham has won the parliamentary seat of Makerfield in northwest England, positioning himself to challenge Prime Minister Keir Starmer for the Labour leadership. It comes after current Prime Minister Keir Starmer faces mounting criticism following poor local election results earlier this year and high-profile resignations within his government. Andy Burnham, one of Labour's most popular politicians, says the result should serve as a warning that the party must change direction. The UK's International Development Minister Jenny Chapman has called for Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon. She said that security conditions must be created in the region so that families displaced by military operations can return safely to their homes. According to Chapman, forced displacement causes serious humanitarian problems worldwide, and safe conditions must be ensured for people to return. Meanwhile, a memorandum signed between the United States and Iran sets out a 60-day negotiation process aimed at resolving the conflict, although Israel is reportedly not included in the talks. Israel has said it has no intention of withdrawing from southern Lebanon and continues to hold the territory, describing it as a buffer zone. Bolivia is facing one of its most severe waves of unrest in recent years as months of protests and roadblocks continue to disrupt daily life and strain the country's economy. Here's more on that story.
Bolivia is set to mark 50 days of unrest on Friday, as protests and roadblocks trigger food, fuel, and medicine shortages, deepening the country's economic and humanitarian crisis. Blockades have cut off major cities from essential supplies, pushing up prices. The National Chamber of Industry estimates the unrest has cost the economy at least $2 billion and cut exports by $500 million. Protest groups are demanding higher wages, labor reforms, and the president's resignation.
More than the millions in losses right now, what worries us is human lives. We have managed to evacuate 7 people. Today, there are about 50 people in critical condition that we have to evacuate. But they don't want to abandon their transport unit either because it is their only work tool. It is the savings of their whole life.
Nobody comes around here. I haven't opened for over a month and a half. I haven't opened on Saturdays or Sundays. I had 9 employees under my care. Unfortunately, I had to tell them to take a break.
The government and protest leaders have been holding talks over the past week in an effort to end the crisis, with President Paz calling for dialogue and calm across the board. The demonstrations began in May, fueled by fuel shortages, rising living costs, and dissatisfaction with policies. The movement has since expanded, drawing support from miners, teachers, farmers, transport workers, and supporters of former President Evo Morales.
After the break, we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay with us.
Looking back on the past is important to learn from experience. It is like a chronicle, page by page. War, Auschwitz, love, humor.
What was the atmosphere like in your home? Perhaps even a particular smell that you associated with.
The smell of the theater. Soviet Union had many shortcomings, and the world we live in today gives us little reason for optimism.
Den här gången vill jag följa en berättelse som inte bärs av monument utan av minnet, den kulturella berättelsen om västra Azerbajdzjan. Jag heter Mikael Sylkeberg, jag är fotograf och dokumentärfilmare.
Hüseyn Əli xan tərəfindən tikilən Göy məsciddir. Bugünkü görüntüsü olan Təpəbaşı məhəlləsindəki məsciddir.
UNESCO beskriver den azerbajdzjanska ashik-konsten som en syntes av poesi, berättande dans samt vokal- och instrumentalmusik. En symbol för kulturell identitet och en väktare av språket.
İlk növbədə mən qeyd etmək istərdim ki, Qərbi Azərbaycan aşıq mühitləri ümumən Azərbaycan aşıq sənətinin inkişafına çox mühüm dərəcədə təsir göstərmişdir.
Sübhana baş endirir.
Bizim Qərbi Azərbaycan xalçaçılığını öyrənəndə biz mütləq qarmaqlı ornamentləri öyrənməliyik.
Mənim doğum şəhadətnaməm Dərələyəz mahalının Qovuşuq kəndində verilib. Mən kəndimə qayıtmaq istəyirəm.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
And welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Pakistan is highlighting its role as a key mediator in the agreement reached between Washington and Tehran. Islamabad has described the deal as a diplomatic success and says further steps are now being taken towards its implementation. Correspondent Mariam Zia brings us more.
Pakistan is moving to define its role as a diplomat in light of the successful mediation efforts between Washington and Tehran. The final agreement signed by both sides is known as the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, which is a testament to Islamabad's critical role. On June 18, Prime Minister of Pakistan Shehbaz Sharif said that the deal had been endorsed by Pakistan, describing it as an evidence of both sides' commitment to a diplomatic resolution of the conflict. In a series of statements posted on X, he thanked the leaders and officials involved in the high-level negotiations between US and Iran. He also acknowledged the contributions of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. Sharif credited Pakistan's military chief, Asim Munir, as a key facilitator of the final breakthrough. President Asif Ali Zardari described the development as a historic moment and said that Pakistan had maintained a principled, balanced, and constructive role throughout the crisis. Pakistan's Foreign Office has dispatched a delegation to Switzerland for the next phase of talks, while officials also point to the diplomatic outreach and international recognition of Islamabad's efforts as implementation of the agreement begins. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly integrated into daily life, questions are growing over how innovation can advance without compromising individual freedoms. Human rights officials and ombudsman representatives from around the world gathered here in Baku to explore possible answers to those concerns. Our reporter İknur Seydamirova reports.
Artificial intelligence is advancing at a lightning speed, but is it leaving fundamental rights behind? In Baku, Azerbaijan, that question is now at the center of a major international response, as ombudsmen and heads of national human rights institutions from around the world have gathered for the International Baku Ombudsman Summit. The high-level forum brought together representatives from around 30 countries, representatives from the region including Azerbaijan, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, as well as Pakistan, Oman, Moldova, Ukraine, and Zambia.
We live in the age of artificial intelligence. There are many areas in which it serves humanity, from healthcare and education to transportation, the economy, and even the legal field. People are able to benefit from the opportunities it provides. However, it also carries risks. These algorithms operate on data. The more data that is collected, the greater the potential threat to individuals' security. In particular, there are concerns regarding people's privacy and the protection of their private lives. If these technologies are not properly regulated, ethical issues may arise, and new legal challenges may emerge. In this regard, it is extremely important that this meeting has been held in Azerbaijan.
Opening sessions focused on the rapid rise of AI and its impacts on public administration and human rights. Delegates weighed both the opportunities and risks with particular attention on transparency, accountability, and the protection of individual rights. Alongside the main plenary, participants took part in parallel discussions on key issues including digital rights, data privacy and security, the future of work, and the growing need for digital literacy in the age of AI. During the event, several agreements were signed with the host country. The summit concluded with the adoption of the Baku Declaration, a framework aimed at guiding the ethical development of artificial intelligence and strengthening global standards on transparency, justice, and accountability.
Ve əlaqələndirilmiş dəstəyi ilə geniş olduqca əhəmiyyətlidir.
What is even more important, the human rights standards are not so, let's say, static. They are alive, dynamic, and if we want to have some more knowledge about the human rights and the possibility on how to deal with the violation of human rights, then we have to cooperate. Any kind of the cooperation, including the written memorandum on the cooperation, will take us to the new stage, let's say, in fighting against those who violate human rights, not only in our countries but all over the world. So the human rights institution has to do this. It is very good for the strengthening of our institution capacities, but also for the strengthening of all the members of our staff.
Notably, the opening day of the summit falls on June 18, which is the Human Rights Day in Azerbaijan, adding symbolic weight to discussions on the rights in the digital age. İknur Seydamirova with Zohrab Shirinov reports from Baku, Azerbaijan.
The Caspian Sea continues to shrink, raising concerns over the future of one of the world's most unique ecosystems. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
The Caspian Sea is the world's largest inland body of water, but its future is at risk. Parts of its shoreline have receded by up to 35 kilometers over the past 2 decades. Official data show that the water levels along Kazakhstan's coast continue to decline. The northeastern Caspian now stands at around minus 29 meters below the Baltic reference level. One member of parliament is now calling for a unified system to track changes along the coast. He says because existing government records do not reflect the sea's actual boundaries. The proposal would involve a single digital map to track the reality of the situation, which includes a number of ecological challenges. The retreating shoreline is creating problems with regard to land management, natural resource development and investment projects. It's also raising concerns about the region's fragile ecosystem. Environmental pressures have become increasingly visible. Since April, dead Caspian seals have repeatedly been found along Kazakhstan's coast. Last autumn, nearly 2,000 seal carcasses washed ashore in one of the largest incidents recorded in recent years. The proposal for a digital coastline tracking system would collect satellite, hydrological and geodetic data and establish a coordinated response mechanism for mass death of seals, fish and birds. And if something isn't done, scientists warn the Caspian could lose another 3 to 5 meters of water by 2050. And that could affect millions of people across the 5 countries that share its coastline and put additional pressure on an ecosystem already under strain. Arisa Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
And over to the World Cup, supporters have welcomed the Turkey national football team in San Francisco ahead of a crucial World Cup match. The squad is preparing to face Paraguay as both teams look to recover from opening round defeats.
Football fans gave the Turkey national team a warm welcome in San Francisco on Friday after the squad completed its final training session ahead of its Group D match against Paraguay. More than 100 supporters gathered outside the team hotel, waving Turkish flags and cheering as the players arrived. The team has been training in nearby San Jose under head coach Vincenzo Montella. All players took part in the session, which included tactical preparations for Saturday's match at Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara. The game is a crucial one for both sides. Turkey opened its World Cup campaign with a 2-0 defeat to Australia in Vancouver, while Paraguay lost 4-1 to the United States in Los Angeles. Another defeat could leave either team facing an early exit from the tournament. Montella acknowledged that criticism following the loss to Australia had affected some members of his squad, particularly younger players, but said the team was focused on the challenge ahead.
For me, the team is eager to get back on the pitch. They've felt the pressure a bit. I'll say it again. They are men, not robots. They've felt the strain of what they've perceived as a bit of an overreaction. But I'm confident. The goal is to get them to the match feeling as relaxed and at ease as possible, because I think that's how they'll be able to perform at their best.
The outcome of the next match could prove decisive in the race for a place in the knockout stage, with both teams needing points to keep their qualification hopes firmly in their own hands.
And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.